Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading for Juneteenth weekend in on June of 2022, and I'm looking at a battery that is a lot lower than I thought it would be, so let's hope I don't run out of time here. It's a good way to make this quick as I stumble over Juneteenth and all of that. This is the second year that Juneteenth has been a federal holiday, so I'm not filming on actual Juneteenth. I'm filming the day that I'm off work. But it became a federal holiday to commemorate, broadly speaking, the end of slavery in the United States. It actually commemorates something a lot more specific about when news came to the final sort of Confederate groundhold and stronghold in 1865, shortly after the war ended, but certainly after the war ended, there was still slavery being practiced in the Confederacy or the former Confederacy until, troops could get to areas and, spread the word, the war is over, the Union won, and we can officially enact the Emancipation Proclamation, which was, put into law years prior. So that's what it celebrates. For years, it's been widely unknown in the U.S. outside of African American circles, and now that's starting to change. But anyway, for me, this means that I have some time today to talk about what I've been reading this past week, so I thought I'd also get to that. As always, with these AM reading videos, I'm starting with the next short story in this collection by Dorothy Parker. I've been reading one short story in this collection per AM reading video since last May, and this one is a bit apropos for the Juneteenth holiday. It's called Clothe the Naked, which Parker published in 1938, and it is her first time directly embodying an African-American protagonist in her story. Actually, last week's story had a character on the sidelines who was African-American, but this is much more, their experiences are much more central in this story, or the experiences of one woman and her family. This is about a woman named Big Lanny who had, I guess, a contemporary woman who had 4 children, all of whom died. One of them through street violence in a fight, 2 of them through illnesses, which are alluded that, they are because they are impoverished people without much access to health care, so that they died of sort of diseases of being compressed in a small space with a lot of other impoverished people. And then her 4th child, Adele, died during childbirth, which was certainly a out-of-wedlock birth, because there's no reference to the husband, and in fact the baby is described as being light-skinned, which may or may not allude to a white father. But the baby also, just the tragedy keeps coming for this woman. The baby was born blind. His name is Raymond, and if this is a contemporary story, this is the 1930s, and there's not a lot of good options for people, especially for black people in this era, to deal with people with special needs. So she actually stops most of her work to take care of him, which puts her even more into poverty. She works a couple days a week doing laundry, but otherwise her neighbors, when they can, they send him clothes and such, hence the title Clothe the Naked. So it is a look into sort of the socio-political realities of being from this black and poor environs, really. And it looks into how this affects Raymond as he grows up, and the ending is tragic because he particularly has to put on some ill-fitting clothes, and he stumbles around and people are making fun of him. It's, I guess, a frustrating and kind of tragic story overall about what these people have to deal with, and Big Lonnie wanting to keep him out of institutions because they're just not known to be really safe and helpful places. So, yeah, it's a different, it's a little bit of a longer story. It takes a much more serious subject matter, I think, than a lot of the social commentary, dashed off, sort of sarcastic stuff that she usually does, Parker usually does, and with white characters mostly. The thing about this is I think it's a craft choice for that time period where this story is told basically like reporting. It's all very passive. It's not even exactly third person close in a way, but it's just a style that wouldn't jive today, because you don't get close enough to the character and it's like, somebody basically relaying, then this happened and then this happened. And I mean, there's some emotional parts to it, but it's very passive writing. And I feel like that's probably just a choice for the day, although I guess to write this specifically about this community might be, I think it was meant to be out of the ordinary for a writer to do, a white writer especially. So there's that. Maybe that's part of it too, her not wanting to get too close, to a narrator whose experiences she can't really fully understand, I guess, but that's speculation on my part. But yeah, it was surprising and intriguing, so I enjoyed thinking about, what she was bringing up in this story, and I do feel like at least the specifics of Raymond and Big Lonnie gave, specific characterizations to these characters beyond, their, broader environs as well. So, yeah, I thought it was interesting. Good. The first book I finished this week is Know My Name by Chanel Miller, which is a memoir about her experience before, during, and after she was sexually assaulted in a very infamous case in 2015, where she was at a party with her sister. She got drunk and she was, separated from all of her friends. And this freshman at the party, the frat party taking place at Stanford University, took advantage of her and was assaulting her largely when she was unconscious, and was ultimately pulled off, like he had her like behind some dumpsters, and he was pulled off by some passing students on bikes. And that's what ultimately ended what was happening in the moment, and she woke up in the hospital having absolutely no idea what had happened to her, except that she's scraped and bruised with a lot of debris in her hair and in other places as well. The story comes together slowly that she was assaulted while she was drunk and impaired, and from there it turns into a big court case where it drags on for a long time because her attacker, Brock Turner, refuses to take responsibility for what he did. And from there we get into a lot of stuff, about her trauma and how she deals with the various facts of what's going on here, about not remembering anything, but having this experience in the hospital, and experiences with having to come out or not come out to family and friends, because since this is a criminal case that the DA thought they had enough evidence for, she, as a rape and assault victim, her name was kept secret. So it was coming on in the news, and sometimes she was even figuring out things about what happened to her as everyone else was, just from the news. And so we go from there into ways that society really slut shames women even when they are assault victims, and also other male assault victims, about their choices, and just the sort of societal prejudices we have in that arena. And then the way that the defense, she really had a keen eye for the psychology of what the defense did to alienate her and shame her for her decisions, while painting her attacker as someone who was like just one of the boys. And there's a lot of commentary in here as well about other similar sexual abuse cases, and the way that society, has framed them oftentimes to, impair the victim even further. And so many, victims of sexual assault don't even get as far as Chanel did in terms of a trial and all of that. And there's, of course, a lot of other specific information in here about her own life, and I thought this was an amazing recounting. The story on its own obviously is very compelling because it was an infamous case. Chanel Miller's victim impact statement, when she was still anonymous, she gave permission to have it published, and it went completely viral. And I think the strength of her writing really blew the lid off of all of this prejudice and bias we have about victim shaming culture, and we saw what happened in assault for real based on her writing, and it was read in its entirety on the congressional floor, and Hillary Rodham Clinton quoted her in her book. So she became a bit of a celebrity before she even decided to come out publicly with what happened to her. So there's a lot going on here, and I feel like she just has such a strong writing voice. I do think there was a little bit of purple prose in some of her backstory in the beginning, but mostly when she is talking about these deep-seated issues of victim shaming and other problems in society about how we deal with sexual assault and the perpetrators of sexual assault and how easy we can often be on them. She just writes and has such a strong, clear argument, and the way that she goes through her own sense of trauma and healing. I mean, it's just, I think it's an incredible book because not only what happened to her, but how she can be a voice for people because she had such a strong writing, sensibility. So that made her like a sort of a natural leader in a sense, and that I feel like this book can be very helpful for a lot of people, and it's certainly enlightening about both her personal life and then just societal issues around assault and rape. So I was hugely impressed. I felt like I could have stopped and typed a bunch of quotes into Facebook as I sometimes do, but instead I just kept going and going and going because it was just all so compelling. Although it also took longer than I hoped to read it as well, but still I feel like that's just the tenor of the subject matter really, and how depressing it could be. Although I do think ultimately, I mean, I don't think this is a happy ending sort of book. I don't think she wanted to tie it up with a neat little bow, but I feel like there is a lot of gravitas in here about where she finally ends up, at least in terms of writing this book. So yeah, I thought this was great. The second book I finished just recently was Open Your Gifts, which is an essay collection edited by Kim Coles, and my friend Claudia was published in this, and I picked it for my page 112 tag video I did a little while ago, which I'll link down below. So yeah, and this has been on my shelves for a while. I know I read Claudia's personal essay, immediately after I got it, but I haven't read the rest of them. This is not my usual cup of tea. There is a very distinctly Christian sort of worldview in here, and it's also very sort of self-help inspirational, which is, it's not usually the way I go with dealing with the issues that Coles and her writers bring up in here, but GIFTS is an acronym for things that afflict people and that they have to, overcome in broad ways. So I'll have a list for what each of the letters stands for, and of course all of the essays fit into one of these subject matters. My friend Claudia's was the first one in Intention, and she talked about some formative memories of growing up and attending like an all-girls prestigious school, and she had a couple of teachers take her aside in English and history and say, well, you're obviously not going to do well in this class because you're black. So it starts with this, racism that could really, undercut, a young woman who is trying to come into her own and learn things and become a writer ultimately, because that was always a dream of hers, to become a writer, and she entered the field of nonfiction editing, like in the government space. We live in the DC area, and put off her fiction writing for a long time. But when she published this essay, she was finally starting to write fiction and get published. And so she took that as, she, despite, the racist teachers and a racist society, she, went forth with her own, intention of wanting to become a writer, and finally really achieved the fiction goal that she always wanted. And it's especially touching for me to read this a few years later and realize that she is continuing to get published and live that dream. So I'm really happy for her. The page 112 tag I did was for an essay in forgiveness. It was called In a Whisper by Heidi Lewis. And I read a page that was actually very based in action. Like a lot of these pages are inspirational, so there's a lot of scripture quotes and sort of, action items for, taking your life back and that sort of thing. But the page I read, which was actually page 110, was recap of abuse that she and this writer and her family suffered from her stepfather, who beat her mother and was starting to threaten the children as well. And in this page, she was fantasizing about confronting her stepfather about the abuse that he denied, and we weren't sure where she was going to go with that. But given the tenor of this book, which is all about overcoming adversity in a sort of religiously centered way, and she mentioned God in her section. the ending, what ultimately happened is that she talked with a friend and ultimately did not confront her stepfather or do anything more brash than that, because, you know, the lesson was that, you know, he can't have control over, you know, my personal sense of self and right and wrong. So that forgiveness was about realizing that to stay stuck in a cycle with him would bring her down. So that's what she did, and that's how that essay ended. So yeah, again, this isn't my real cup of tea, and I feel like the essays are uneven a bit in the writing, but in a way it is nice to read this collection now, as I finished a book on sexual assault and the way that it drags out in the court system, and, you know, an abuser who won't, you know, take responsibility and that sort of thing. To have a book about, you know, the inner strength of character in times of adversity, because we have other, you know, assault victims in this book, and just people who have monetary problems and health problems with themselves and their families, and the sorts of things that a lot of people face, and finding the inner strength to overcome it. It is kind of nice to read that right now. Especially when now I'm going right back into the thick of it with this next book on my docket, which is another memoir called In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. This book was the winner of the Reading Women Nonfiction Award, which was a podcast co-hosted by booktuber Kendra Winchester, which I think ceased production last year. But this was an annual award they gave to fiction and nonfiction, and so I think this was 2020's. And it is about another abusive relationship and how she gets out of it. And I think it has a conceit of her, this dream house is like different genres in the essays that she takes on in the writing. So I'm hoping it won't be too gimmicky, but it'll be like more moving. But obviously it had a really good reception by the Reading Women podcast, and it was also a finalist in the BookTube prize, so I'm pretty hopeful, and I will be reporting back next week. But for now, I gotta sign off really quickly because I'm seeing a dash through my battery here, so I have just a very limited time left to go with this before I should, recharge here. But anyway, I should be back on this channel within the next few days. I think I'm going to finally do my Maybe Midrash wrap-up, which was a readathon I took part in last month, so it would be nice to finally wrap that up and move on here, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.